Thanks, Roger. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I specifically want to have my mother hear me, who's in the back row back here. She was queen of the gypsies, or more appropriately, matriarch of the Roma. And I was exhausted. There was a riot brewing outside. There was a lot of clamoring, a lot of noise, a lot of screaming, and I was exhausted. So let me set a little background. And the background is, every year during my residency training, I did a month of neurosurgery and neurosurgical training, following neurosurgeons around, working in the neurosurgical ICU. But I worked at a giant hospital, the biggest hospital probably in the country, 3,000 beds. Just the ICU itself was a massive place, huge, 48 beds in an open ward on one side of the hallway, the other hallway, 24 individual rooms. And I used to have to work, during this time period, I would work 36 hours. So Pat used to say, have a good day and night and day, because I wouldn't see her for a couple days. But during this time period, I was staffing the neurosurgical ICU, and a lot of the sickest and the most severely injured people with brain injuries and tumors would come to this place for treatment. And it's a giant hospital. It's right where Interstate 5 crosses Interstate 10 in Los Angeles. So it's kind of like where the Silk Road crosses the Cocaine Road. And it's an enormous place. So what had happened was I was taking report from the crew before me, and I was going to have to watch a number of people all night long. And a woman, a middle-aged woman, had come in with what's called an intracranial hemorrhage, and that means that because of high blood pressure, her blood vessel had popped inside of her brain, and there was a lot of bleeding on one side of her brain. And this is a very, very serious injury. Very few people can actually, maybe 10% can survive such a thing. And it's a real, for the first 24 to 48 hours, it's a really tricky, dicey thing to do to make sure that the blood pressure stays high enough and that the intracranial pressure stays low enough. And the way that you do that is with medicines and fluids for the blood pressure part, but then taking off some cerebrospinal fluid by draining it to lower the pressure inside the brain. This woman was the matriarch of a giant tribe of Roma. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Roma, but they are a sort of a semi-nomadic people who have a very specific culture of their own. And through the night, as I made a really strong effort to keep this woman alive by balancing the mean arterial pressure and the intracranial pressure, I got to know them a little bit. And so in the morning, about 6 o'clock, and I was scheduled to go at least until 7 or 8 when the crew that handed her to me was going to come back on. I could see that there was a near riot brewing because the family became aware that she was near death. And I was reporting to the next crew. She started to get worse. And there was a lot of screaming, a lot of gnashing of teeth outside. And so I went out there and I tried to find out from the family, what's going on, what's happening? And the son, who I developed a little bit of a relationship throughout the night, came up to me and he said, we have to do something. There's a specific thing, there's a specific ritual that we have to do. It's our belief that if the soul is going to be unified, that if it's not going to be fragmented, we have a very specific ritual that we have to go through, and you have to help us make it happen. And I said, I don't know, what does it involve for one thing? And he described this pretty elaborate ritual to me that involved candles, and I said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure. Well, let's check with the charge nurse. I went back to the charge nurse and told her that they wanted to do a specific ritual inside the room involving candles. There's a bunch of oxygen around, and she said, that's not going to happen. And so I thought for a second, and I just said, it has to happen. It has to happen. and I'll be responsible for it. So I said, I'm going to do some moving around of patients, but I'm going to find a place for these people to do this ritual, which is very important to them. And in that short period of time where I was talking to her, the crowd got much bigger. There was about 60 or 80 or maybe even 100 of these Roma outside, and they were starting to clamor. And I was getting scared. And so I carefully did a bunch of bed shifting. We finally got the woman into a private room, and then I said, here, this is the room. You guys can go ahead and do your thing. And I was kind of relieved, like, okay, I'm going to go be able to finish my paperwork. And he said, Dr. Priest, would you like to participate in this ritual? And I thought to myself for a second, gosh, I don't have time for it. But out of curiosity and out of respect for the woman, I said, yes, I would like to participate. So as it happened, just as this woman passed away, they had this elaborate ritual that involved draping all the body orifices and all the body openings with these beautiful scarves. Some of them were a royal purple with gold, and others were kind of a forest green color. It was beautiful. And then they carefully lit candles around the outside of the room, so that as this woman took her last breath, actually I took her endotracheal tube out such that they could wrap a scarf around her mouth, and as her last heartbeat, everybody was in the room. And I thought, if you're going to choose a way to die, this is how to do it. She's surrounded by people who love her, people who care about her, people who care about her eternal soul. And so we, at a given time, we held hands, they did an incantation, and at a specific time, we pulled off the scarves. And their belief was that was the way that the soul would be released through an open window and out, and to be still unified. And I did feel a surge of something at that time. I don't know whether it was just a surge of relief that this whole ordeal was over, but I did feel something, and they seemed so content and so happy that I had allowed this or facilitated this thing to happen. So I said, oh, thank you. He said, thank you. I went back and I started to write my notes to finally get out of there. And I was so exhausted. The notes were trailing off the end of the paper, downward, and it became just gobbledygook. And then the son approached me again, and I thought, oh boy, I can't tolerate one more thing. I'm too exhausted. But he came and he said, Dr. Priest, I want to tell you one thing. And I said, yes, what is it? And he said, you will never be haunted because the spirit of the Roma will guard you. And I said, and so far, it's been pretty good.